Well, let's get started then.
There you go.
So, um, so yeah, last week we talked about the founding of the Republic of China by a
Mm,
man named Sun Yat-sen. He really founded this on three principles of the love of people, of, of livelihood, of allowing people to live, and of democracy, of being able to be represented. And this was bolstered by the May 4th movement. May 4th was May 4th, 1919, and it was a time when a lot of students rose up, especially starting in Beijing, to fight against um, un- unfair um, policies that were mostly made by foreign countries towards China that really weakened China. And uh, so uh, so there was a lot of revolutionary spirit, but um, but in terms of actually creating a stable government, it was not easy because there were still a lot of major powerful people who kind of were in charge of, because they were military officials. They were in charge of different sections of China, and this was the warlord era. And by the time uh, there was some kind of unification of this huge land of China, the Nationalist Party was now led by a man named Chiang Kai-shek, who was known to be a little more militant in his strategies, and he really waged a very authoritarian kind of government and campaign where he eradicated a lot of a lot of the communists because he saw the communists as threatening to the Republic of China. Um, the Japanese invaded China in spite of Chiang Kai-shek's rule, and the Chinese Communist Party had been exiled in far out in northern and western parts of China, where they won the favor of a lot of just common people, a lot of peasants, a lot of farmers, and this led to the victory of the Chinese Communist Party in 1949. So, so uh, I kind of um, at this point, I like to think a little bit about what is communism and how does it relate to other forms of government or other ideologies. Um, uh, so um, I wanted to ask you guys, what are some definitions of communism you guys have?
very militant, kind of. Well,
No words. Okay, I hear from Matt says there's a militancy involved, that so there's strong military presence, I guess. Okay, okay. How about what is the main definition of communism?
well, communism definition wise is it's like everyone is equal. There's no like one person who's better than the other.
Yeah, everyone is equal, and no one is better than the other. One definition is that one, yeah, that there's equality and fairness. Um, and are there other kinds of ideologies that also agree with this idea of equality?
Isn't it socialism? If I remember right.
I guess, yeah, probably socialism is kind of an ideology that also wants us to work well in a society, right? And have, I don't think it's, I think socialism, yeah, is kind of like about making it livable for everyone,
Mm-hmm.
having social structures that can allow for everyone to live, no matter what. And so one of the barriers to socialism and communism is when you have a lot of wealth imbalance, right? When you have people who are very rich and people who are very poor. Um, things like the Occupy movements, remember, like Occupy Wall Street, um, showed that in America, definitely people can get very mad at the fact that there's huge wealth gaps. Um, well, I guess does democracy talk about equality?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah. Yeah. So why are democracy and communism seen as not the same, and in fact seen as completely opposite by some people?
uh, Damn. I suppose because communism is more so is that it's enforcing people to be, the same no matter what. Whereas democracy is everyone is, equal right off the bat. But what you do, with yourself determines whether or not you move up a like class or not.
So communism is about kind of you said a force thing, maybe coercion, meaning people have to do things. Maybe it's more about what you are doing personally as part of this group of people, right? So it makes me think of, I don't know, I don't know if you guys know the quote by John F. Kennedy. Asked when he became president, he said, "Ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country," which is kind of a little bit of a, it reminds me of what we're talking about with communism. That communism is also about the mobilization of the masses, of um, of stirring all the people to be part of this cause and this agenda of having power coming from the people. It seems like it's a little bit of uh, maybe a ideologic, a little bit of a ideal, kind of idea of a revolution. Um, yeah. I see someone else coming on to the presentation. Is this, and I'm not, oh, is this Elizabeth? Elizabeth Willis? Okay, great. Well, any other thoughts about what communism is? So my next part, I heard someone, who spoke up?
I didn't say anything.
Okay. Maybe I just heard it in the background. Oh, and can I just ask, who is Eli? Is that Elizabeth?
Yeah, it's me.
Okay. Oh, great. Oh,
Sorry, I wasn't able to, like, I had to, like, download it and stuff. I don't know. It wasn't working.
Okay, great. Well, so today we're talking about kind of the People's Republic of China. So, at the time from 1949 to 1978, led by Mao Zedong. Uh, so, so I wanted to ask you guys, do you guys think that communism was a good fit for China? So I'm going to ask that in the chat, and you can respond either by using your voice or by using the chat. So do you think communism is a good fit for China? Why or why not? I'd love to see some examples.
I think it might have been because it's such a big country and there's such a disparity in terms of like finances. Like, there's it's just, I think it's just like America, where there does need to be some kind of push from the government for things to be leveled out a little bit.
That's a really good point, that with bigger kind of states,
Yeah.
it's a lot of a lot of a lot of working parts, right? And it might
Yeah.
help to have a a government that gets everyone on board, with the
Yeah.
same thing. And
Yeah.
so maybe strong state power might
Yeah.
be good. I think a lot of people are saying that with the kind of the the virus response, and
Yeah, absolutely.
so that's interesting. um, of course, that flip side is like, I think a lot of people feel like, in contrast to America, oh, what about these restrictions to these
Yeah.
beautiful freedoms that we love in America? So, yeah.
Well, I mean, I think there probably needs to be like some kind of medium, not just completely government controlled, but there does need to be some kind of like, I guess, like standardization from the government.
Yeah, that there should be a middle ground, that it's not really one or the other, and you do in our memory, in the time that we've been alive, there have been some pro-democracy protests that you might have seen in the news, like Hong Kong, things about Taiwan that are connected to the way China it talks about Taiwan. So um, so clearly there still are actors who are interested in a democratic China, whatever that might look like. But I think, Elizabeth, what you might be getting at is that it's not so easy, and maybe that's why, it still is kind of this. It is nominally still communist. It's not the communist of Mao Zedong's time, so not quite, but yeah. Well, let me ask you guys. So we kind of went through so many different philosophies and ideologies, and I kind of, in this slide, I have like a column on the left hand side about like kind of governmental systems, or even political systems, and then on the other side I have like these things that we learned about that are kind of beliefs, right? And a lot of them come from or philosophies, and a lot of them we learn about: Confucianism, Taoism, Buddhism. These are the three major pillars of Chinese culture, right? And then other things that are coming later on, like Christianity, maybe even just just belief in just good modern science, right? Are there any political? Does communist match up with anything that Chinese believe or feel are connected to culturally? Are there any parts of communism that are connected to Confucianism, Taoism, or Buddhism? Yeah, not. Yeah, I'm hearing crickets, and that might be for a reason. Let me put that in the chat in case anyone is only doing it by chat. So, uh, is communism compatible with Confucianism, Taoism, or Buddhism? Yeah. Yeah. So I think, like, as these systems of belief of kind of moral upstanding behavior, Confucianism might be similar to communism in that it is like it it's it might be kind of like, yeah, emphasizing the state power, the state orthodoxy, as I say in this in this slide, and so it's kind of honoring authority, like um, um, being told what to do in a way. On the other side of the things, it is not. Communism is not very consistent with these belief systems. For one thing, the communism conceived of by Mao Zedong and really inherited by the Soviets in Russia did not think that emphasis on family was a good thing. So actually, at this time, the family was really demonized, like, because within the idea is like within the individual family, you can have, a lot of inequality. You can have, like, you have to honor the father all the time, and so communism was kind of seeing itself as liberating some of these liberating the Chinese people from some of these traditional values, a lot of which took place in the family, of honoring the father, honoring the older male in the family. So that shows a big break between communism and Another thing, but so you were seeing two different sides of the story, that communism seems, maybe it worked in China because of an emphasis on strong state power, but it also was not consistent with certain traditions in Chinese culture. The other thing that communism did bring to Chinese people at this time was a alternative to systems that had been not very successful in China. The systems being capitalism and imperialism, because both of these led to foreign powers really running roughshod into China and bleeding them of their wealth and just making them colonies of other, of all their major cities to be just colonial ports for other countries. And so communism might have been better in that sense, right? And it also kind of, I don't know if it reminds you of any other of the weeks that we talked about, but the Song Dynasty, especially with the Green Sprouts Acts, they were kind of quite socialist policies that were about kind of collectivizing things, like increasing taxes, making it possible to give small farmers loans and stuff like that. So communism, maybe is similar to other things that have happened in Chinese history before. Great. So let's go on to what's going on with Mao Zedong. So Mao Zedong is this major leader. He's not the only person who led China to, the communist state that it is, but he certainly is the leader, this cult figure that really people loved him in part because he kind of seemed like the common person. He was from a peasant class. The peasant class he was from a slightly higher class than a lot of peasant classes. So it's not like he came without privilege, but at the very least, he was from a peasant class. One thing that he was very influenced by was actually legalism. I don't know if you guys remember legalism, but that very harsh philosophy that was one of the contending philosophies early on in Chinese history was something that Mao, when he was in school, he was really into. So this is something he wrote in a high school essay. And I'd like us all to read that first quote in this first bullet point. So, yeah. Anybody want to summarize it? That first quote?
I'll summarize it.
Sure, yeah. What is he getting at?
So it's saying, as long as we have law and order, everyone will be happy.
Yeah. So it's saying that, I know we all want the best possible outcome for all of us, but the only way for that to be possible is for there to be some laws, right? So that's his strategy. The next quote I have is from so a lot of the things that he said were compiled in a little red book that we'll talk about a little later on. That was really all of his sayings that were kind of the official standard ideology that everyone read, that he wrote. And so the next bullet point is a quote that he has on his views of what it means to enact a revolution, a communist revolution. So let's read that. So let's read it, and when you're ready, you can summarize it for the class.
Hold on.
Need more time?
Yeah, so I'm just I was just trying to summarize it in my head.
Okay, I got a good chat.
Oh, there you go.
Oh,
Uh,
Yashir says, he's saying that for positive action and any actual change to happen, there needs to be an ugly fight with whatever is preventing the revolution. Like, it's not a time to play nice, because the opposing force they're interested in subduing you. So to really enact a real revolution, you really need to, lives have to be lost and stuff like that. And I don't know if prior to this class you heard of anything about communist China, but that certainly did happen. It was definitely a pretty violent time. So yeah, do you guys agree or disagree with what he's saying?
Well, I agree. I think, I mean, I feel like history's shown that no ruling class is ever gonna take it lightly that another kind of ruling entity is trying to take over. Especially when like they're going against like your core beliefs. Like they want to change the core beliefs of what you do and the way you think people should live.
Yeah, really, really interesting. Like, yeah, that there's it's an uphill battle, and the stakes are like the cards are often stacked against the powerless. Yeah. On the other hand, now I'm thinking, oh God, I should have also added, a Martin Luther King quote alongside this and been like, oh, there are forms of, some people that was the whole non-violent resistance thing, right? Like that you have to show up with love or something. And
That's a really good point.
Yeah. And Yoshira says she agrees with the basic idea, but if the revolution is actively harming the people it's supposed to be protecting, it might not be a worthwhile cause. That's a good point. And I think when I describe some of the other events in this time, you might assess that some of this was not actually justified, that what they did. Great. Well, let me get into kind of the major. Actually, what we're gonna do? We're gonna watch a clip. We're gonna watch a clip of the documentary that I mentioned. So this is a movie called The Gate of Heavenly Peace. We're gonna watch a little bit of it right now, like about 10 minutes of it, and then we're gonna watch the rest of it. Not the rest of it. It's like a 4-hour documentary. We're gonna watch another segment of it next week when we talk about the reform era of China, when it really opened up to the rest of the world. So let me pull this up. But the clip that I'm showing you is a great introduction to the founding of the People's Republic of China, and why it might have been might have really stirred the spirits of people who were young at that time. So can everyone see the video?
Yeah.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Let's take a look.
Since I was involved, I feel it's my duty to straighten you out.
When individuals stand up to power, they bring to the encounter the lessons that power has taught them and the harm it has done them. Merely to stand up does not free us from these things. Behind every gesture of hope and courage lies a life, a society, a history. Tiananmen, the Gate of Heavenly Peace, is the gate leading into the imperial city, for centuries the center of power in China. In 1919, though the emperor had long been overthrown, students gathered at Tiananmen to denounce the government's failure to stand up to foreign powers. Their protest spread quickly through the country and came to be known as the May 4th movement. Years of student demonstrations followed. Despite violent government repression, arrests, and killings, generation after generation, the students came out to protest, inspiring other Chinese to follow them. China was in danger, and corrupt officials didn't care. Young intellectuals felt they must place their lives on the line to awaken the people. They aimed to save the nation through democracy and modern science, and the discarding of oppressive traditions. When the great change did come, it came from the countryside, a peasant army led in part by people who had participated in the student protests. Mao Zedong's Communist Army entered Beijing in 1949. National power returned to the city and to Tiananmen. The traditional rulers of China had always remained hidden behind the closed gates of the imperial city. When Mao appeared before the people atop Tiananmen, he reversed centuries of symbolism. The center of power was visibly shifted from the imperial city behind the gate to the broad masses in front, all facing the leader who stood above.
在开国大典之前啊，天安门广场啊。
Before the founding ceremonies of the People's Republic of China in 1949, Tiananmen Square was full of weeds as high as your waist. Students from Beijing and Tsinghua universities volunteered to clear away all the weeds. Yes, it was students then too. At that time, young people were very enthusiastic about the People's Liberation Army and about the revolution. It was at Tiananmen that the People's Republic of China was founded. It was at Tiananmen that Mao announced, "The Chinese people have stood up."
When I was a child, I went to Tiananmen twice a year for the parades. Mao stood on Tiananmen Gate. After the parade had passed, a huge crowd of children would rush up to the gate, shouting joyfully. No words, just the sound of children's voices. This created the desired effect. I was one of those children. I would wave flowers or release balloons or doves. Mao would wave his hand like this.
At that time, many communist leaders moved into quarters within the old imperial city. Before, they had lived with the peasants, and it was said, fish cannot live out of water. But after the revolution, if a peasant went into the city to look up a leader he had known in the past, he wouldn't be able to find him. The water could no longer find the fish. The fish were inside the palace. And Mao himself became, in effect, the emperor, hailed as a man who would live forever. Of course, I was unable to see it like this in the 1950s.
In the 1950s, the government ordered the building of a great square in front of Tiananmen to accommodate the masses. Several of China's later leaders first came to prominence as dedicated model workers in the building of the square. The gigantic square would become the largest public space in the world and the center of Chinese political life. On one side of it was built a great hall of the people. On the other, a museum of history and the revolution. In the center of the square stood the monument commemorating the martyrs of the revolution, a tombstone of the great dead, which consecrates the square as sacred ground. The monument depicts scenes from China's history since 1840. There are no recognizable individuals. Collectively, they represent the people. Among the ancestors of New China pictured on the monument are the students of May 4th, 1919, protesting before the gate itself. When the students of 1989 occupied Tiananmen Square, they made their headquarters here, beneath images of other students who changed China's history. They were consciously associating themselves with the tradition of student protest in China. By their own actions, they were adding further meaning to this place, the place in all of China most charged with meaning.
Good morning, beloved Peking. Good morning, beloved Tiananmen, Gate of Heavenly Peace.
In Mao's era, Tiananmen became the symbol of the new China. the gate and the square, the people, and the leader who expressed the people's will. Tiananmen had once led into the imperial palace. Now, it was the focus of Mao's square. Mao and Tiananmen were one.
Tiananmen Square became completely entangled with the lives of the Chinese people. This was because under the Communist Party, everyone's life became involved with politics. When I graduated from university in 1966, I sincerely believed what I was taught, that I was a brand new boat to be used in the construction of the great mansion of communism. I was willing to be put wherever my country needed me, and I was prepared to stay in place my whole life. To me, Mao was like God. I believed that he was not only the great leader of the Chinese people, but also the great leader of people throughout the world. I feared the day when he would no longer be with us. I really hoped there'd be a scientific breakthrough that would enable young people like us to voluntarily give up a year of our lives to add a minute to his. That way the world would be saved.
In 1976, Mao died between an earthquake and a solar eclipse, traditional portents of the end of an era. At the funeral, the great throng faced Tiananmen, but the place where Mao had stood was empty. All of the leaders remained on a platform below. Mao still resides in the square. The mausoleum, built in 1977 at the south end of the square, is not a tomb so much as a grand villa. It contains a huge marble armchair for the chairman, and a bed too, where he lies.
I didn't shed a single tear when Mao died. I felt I'd been cheated. I've never visited the Mao Mausoleum. It's so disgusting.
Mao is dead, but not gone. The great portrait that hangs on Tiananmen still presides over every parade and celebration held in the Great Square.
Okay, so that was the clip of a documentary called The Gate of Heavenly Peace, which you might know that's the translation for Tiananmen, that large gate in front of the Forbidden City in Beijing, and it's where the major pro-democracy protests happened in 1989. And so we'll talk about that next week. But the kind of the prelude to all this is just the story of communist China and what that meant. Yeah, I hope that was a good visual to learning about this history, this time in history. I'd love to hear what you guys think before we get into kind of some facts and figures about the time. Did anybody have any opinions or thoughts about what they learned? I think I see a lot about the cult, how to create the cult of a leader, right? Or a charismatic leader figure. Is it different? Is Mao different from an emperor? Is he? I mean, his ideology is something different, right? This person of the people, and it makes you think: why does any leader get the power that it has? In ancient China, it was because the leader was justified as having this mandate of heaven, this heaven's authority to rule over us in a benevolent way. But and in a way, Mao is trying to do that now. But yeah, so it's interesting. Okay, so I'm talking too much. Let me see. I see. Let's see. So you're here. I really like your comment. Yeah.
I feel like well, not just with him, like with a lot of like leaders that had a loyal following, it seems like the one of like the main components of that is making people really proud of where they come from, and just proud to be part of it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, that's just what I got from it.
Yeah. So to the fact that there was something to be excited about, and that there was real meat behind his messages of liberating, the classes from a capitalist society. Yeah. I think. Yeah, the other thing was interesting was to hear how both Mao and the leaders around him, they could not help but eventually kind of lose some of their connection with the everyday people. They had, throughout the Chinese Civil War, they struggled very long. They went through this long march where they kind of, because they had been pushed out by the nationalists, and eventually slowly regained power in very remote rural areas of China, and that's how they won the favor of the people. But by the time they won, get to basically reconstruct the capital of China, what does it mean to rule this huge place? You end up, I'm sure it gets to your head, and power, absolute power corrupts absolutely. That's what all the superhero movies tell us, right? So, yeah. The way he went. Yeah. So yeah, there's just a lot, and I think you saw how there's a lot of young people in a lot of those clips. Of course, this is a documentary that's kind of compressing a lot of large amounts of time. So let's kind of break it down to talk about the different eras, and I think the book is a great roadmap for that. So the beginnings of communist China sees a few major changes. The first thing, and this is going back to something that Sun Yat-sen said was a problem way back when he founded that first Republic of China, was that he said that most farmers in China do not own their own land. 9 out of 10 farmers are at the whims of predatory landlords, right? And there needs to be some kind of reform of the land policy. So there was the communists did this. When they finally got power, they had a massive redistribution of land, but it was very violent. An estimated 2 million people died as a result of these huge struggles. Let's see. Yeah, and Yushir also added something about who Mao was actually as a person. It might not be easy to get at. Yeah. So you had these things that were meant to really revolutionize the systems economically. There's also there was also about the effort to educate the masses about communism, and so there was the campaign to reform thought, and within this there was a 3 anti-campaigns. So in Chinese, that's San campaign. So trying to eliminate the anti forces, people who were seen to be not revolutionary enough, and were still the remnants of this older structure. So it's to eliminate corruption and bureaucratism. And this is the first of many kind of purgings of unrevolutionary elements. And finally, there are huge, there's just a lot of big state projects And the first was this 5-year plan. So within kind of roughly around the first few years of the founding of the People's Republic of China, they really wanted to become self-sufficient on its own and to mobilize its huge populations to be able to provide all the food and all the heavy industry that it needed. And it also needed to pay back the Russians, the Soviet Union, because the Soviet Union had very much supported the communists and helped it win the war. And so, so these are huge things going on. And it doesn't stop once these campaigns happen. At the very end of the 50s is yet another major thing that Mao tries to get happening, which is called the Great Leap Forward. And it was this plan to overtake Britain in steel production and to say that a communist country can be competitive as an industrial country. And so the plan was to have just the common people start to be involved in steel production. But this was done through a very decentralized network of small scale production. And unfortunately, just the common people didn't really it just didn't work. It was not successful because there was a lack of technical skill. And this also kept a lot of these farm people from doing the farm work they needed to do to feed China. And so after 3 years of bad harvest and famine, 30 million people died. It's seen as some of the most horrific, tragic, moments in human history. A lot of people dying at this time. Sometimes people will argue with you about the numbers of people who died, and it's still a huge contention because in the Western world we've really demonized communism, and then amongst I don't know if you have any friends who are like revolutionaries who love to talk about like socialist, communist stuff, but they might say, whoa, those numbers were overreported because of Western propaganda, and it's really many fewer. The reality is these two worlds were in competition with each other, so they both have an interest in saying different things. What happened in the Great Leap Forward is an example of collectivization, of people organizing, within communities. So there were 26,000 communes created, each with 5,000 households and 10,000 acres. And by the time of, well into the People's Republic of China, it was common for your neighborhood to be a work unit. In Chinese, it's called danwei. So you were literally working in your neighborhood, and and your neighborhood is working in concert with each other. Yeah. The result of the Great Leap Forward, one of the results was that Mao had to roll back some of his policies because they were so unsuccessful, and and he was also forced to let a lot of people immigrate out of China. A lot of people fled China in the first decade of the communist rule. A lot of people were the former land-owning class. No matter how wealthy you are, it's still devastating to be kicked out of your, your home and forced to flee. And many of these people were forced to flee to the U.S. And I think I don't know if any of you folks have Chinese friends, but some of them, especially if they came around the 50s or 60s, they might be very anti-communist because they were kicked out by these huge campaigns. Yeah. Any thoughts so far about the Great Leap Forward? I definitely am probably missing a lot, and so I'm sure you guys have, you can even disagree with me. I might have gotten some things wrong. Any thoughts about the Great Leap Forward? Let me ask. Okay. Any?
Well, that kind of explains why China would always try and build like so many high like skyscrapers and whatnot. To try and show off how much steel and iron and whatnot that they have.
Okay, kind of you're kind of connecting it to the competition we see economically today, and that there still is. It's like it still is kind of a like a kind of a global competition.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I think what's interesting is I was just watching a PBS documentary, the program Independent Lens, and it was all about these efforts to end hunger in the 60s and 70s, and some American agricultural specialists learned how to better make increase the yields of wheat through a certain like kind of development in agricultural science, and he brought it to India to try to help it out, and this was of huge interest because India was a democracy, and so it was seen as being on towards the U.S., towards the Western side of the Cold War fight, and the whole question was, of these two largest countries in the whole world, China and India, who's going to win? Is it going to who's going to be successful? Is it the one that is going towards communism, or is it the one that's more towards capitalism and democracy? And I think ultimately, it seems like we're going to see. I mean, this Great Leap Forward was very much a disaster. 30 million people dying, and so I think. And eventually, China did adopt. Once Mao died, China moved towards capitalism. So it seems like capitalism kind of won out in this time period. I'm not saying that capitalism is all good, because I think we can see how it leads to huge environmental problems and huge other inequities. So yeah. Well, let's see. Any last thoughts about the Great Leap Forward? Okay, I'm going long, and I don't intend to, because I'm only talking about subjects very broadly. Well, in the middle of the 60s, Mao once again tried to start a huge revolution, and he called it the Cultural Revolution. And in a way, it was around the same time as some of the big counterculture revolutions going on in the West. If you think about the Civil Rights Movement, and then the Black Panthers and Black Power movement, and then a lot of what was called the New Left, the new kind of democratic and socialist movements going on in the US, especially in the summer of 68, were very important moments. And so Mao was trying to do the same thing in China. And so this was as the name it kind of explains, this was an effort it's kind of part of the thought reform. It was an effort to re-engage the masses, to re-explain everybody about the communist revolution through arts production. But it meant that arts was actually, ironically, very much censored and stifled, and it was only state and party controlled kinds of production that were allowed in this time period. So at this time, I mentioned model operas, and I might show you some examples of them, because they're kind of hilarious, but they are these elaborate, we saw some clips of them. They're like ballet. They're a combination of Chinese theater and like Western ballet, and they're all these operas that take stories that had been popular and that had some kind of communist message, but now in a ballet form. What happened at this time was Mao really, really got young people engaged. He basically had young people start, like, basically drop out of school because, well, he didn't, I mean, he closed all these schools. He basically closed all the major institutions, and had and encouraged young people to 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 basically fight his fight. And so they started these kind of paramilitary forces, kind of like gangs, and they were called the Red Guard. And a lot of them, you know, helped to do these kinds of like absurd scenes where you had former leaders who were now seen as enemies of Mao being dragged out to the street. They put dunce caps on them, like those long cone hats, or like they would put them in, you know, in those like wooden, I forgot what they're called, but like those wooden clasps, or even weigh them down with cement and parade them through the street and force them to repent, you know, and to and so yeah, there were pretty crazy things happening at this time. A lot of at this time, these youth are also going out into the country, kind of like being reconnected with the peasants of China, and trying to contribute in that way. And so and this was also tied to economics too, and trying to again reinvigorate China's economy. So there was some growth. There was 13.5 annual industrial growth. Again, there's a priority on heavy industry, and they're trying to build up stuff. But then again, it leads to lower food produced and just lower living standards, and basically everyone is starving to death and poor and dirt poor again. So yet again, the Cultural Revolution kind of dissipates and starts to peter out by the time of the 70s. And at the same time, the United States is also starting to, and the United States and China are starting to become more friendly. They're realizing that it's not really in their interest to still be, you know, having this Cold War where they kind of are kind of enemies. It's better to have a outward expression of friendship. And this happens first when President Jimmy Carter goes there, and then later on Nixon visits, Nixon is first. President Nixon goes and visits them, and he eats Peking duck. I don't know if you guys have ever eaten Peking duck, but that's a very fun dish, and it was made very popular because President Nixon was seen on TV eating it. I should have shown you guys a picture of Nixon eating Peking duck. So yeah, yeah. Well, why don't I switch? Why don't I show you guys a picture of President Nixon eating Peking duck, and then I'll ask you guys for your thoughts. So thoughts about the Cultural Revolution. Any thoughts about the Cultural Revolution? Does it remind you of any other moments in history in other places in the world? Okay. Okay, so this is a picture of President Nixon eating Peking duck. I don't know if you guys see it. And here he is with a person named Zhou Enlai. Now, Zhou Enlai was another very important leader, and he was more interested in the diplomacy aspects of governance, and he was interested in reaching out to other countries. And he actually was involved in a conference that was. Let me pull it up, that information. It was the first conference that
joined all these countries from Asia and Africa that had been formerly colonized. So so this is a little slide about foreign relations, and just showing that even before oh no, I'm sorry, not even before, but that there was a kind of there was a third world solidarity going on too. People, different countries around the world that weren't these major Western powers wanted to support each other and see each other as fighting the same fight against colonialism. This is a time when a lot of former colonies were starting to go through the process of being decolonialized, but it was leading to huge conflicts like the Vietnam War, the Korean War. And so China was on the side of supporting a lot of countries, and especially if they were waging their own communist revolutions in their countries. So the Bandung Conference took place in 1955, and it was 29 African and Asian states trying to promote Afro-Asian economic and cultural cooperation and opposing colonialism and neo-colonialism. So yeah, and Zhou Enlai was involved, and he tried to even, encourage communism in Indonesia. I'm sure he was involved in China's relationship with Vietnam as well. And he saw Africa as ripe for revolution and visited Africa 8 times. So these interesting moments. In the U.S., in the United States, people were interested in communism and what China was doing in communism. Like I mentioned, it was connected to the counterculture movement. So these are 2 pictures of people holding up the Little Red Book. So this is a book that was a summary of all of Chairman Mao's major quotations that he said while his party was exiled and waging this long march in China. And I think that quote about revolution comes from that little book. But on the first picture on the top, you see is a clip from a still from a movie, an art movie from France, and it was called La Chinoise, which it means the Chinese in French, and it's kind of a satire about French student revolutionaries who are reading the Little Red Book and getting all these ideas from Mao. And then below that is the Black Panthers. Does anybody know or heard about the Black Panthers or learned about them in other classes? Well, they were a political party of African Americans, and they were trying to gain. They were kind of, a lot of people were part of African nationalism. This idea that maybe there should be a separate state, nation in the U.S., especially considering for minorities, for people of color, and for the Black community, because even with the civil rights movement and the Civil Rights Acts being passed, there was still a lot of issues by the time of the late 60s. You still had huge economic disenfranchisement and poverty and racist police and the CIA and FBI doing all the surveillance of these different groups, especially the Black Panthers. And it didn't help that they were reading Mao Zedong's readings. So not only are they a Black Power group, but they're also reading communist readings. And so the U.S. government, saw them as an enemy, I guess. In New York City, both the Black Panthers and the Young Lords, the Puerto Rican counterculture movement, were in Harlem and in the Bronx, were very interested in both Chinese communists, the Chinese communist regime, but also in alternative medicines from outside of Western institutions. And so they looked to Chinese medicine to help address drug issues in their community. And they actually learned acupuncture. One of the people in this, amongst the Black Panthers who were acupuncturists was Tupac Shakur's father, Mutulu Shakur. So a little interesting random thing. Anyone a fan of Tupac or his music?
I don't listen to him, but I know about him. But
yeah.
A comment I wanted to make earlier was about the Cultural Revolution and how, you know, those two people suspiciously died with Mao Zedong.
Yeah.
Didn't Hitler do something like that before as well? Like he had a whole bunch of people in his party killed, like his political party.
I don't know specifically about those cases, but I definitely guess that I can safely assume that yeah, any kind of dictate, like kind of autocrat like this is going to try to kill off their opponents. It's going to seem really crazy and extreme, but they feel threatened too. One thing to note about those two cases, so on the last bullet point, talking about how these two people who were major figures in the party, they were leading the government in certain ways. Because they were at some point they showed some opposition to what Mao was thinking. They both flourished in different ways, and there are countless ways of this. But what I wanted to note was that sometimes the way people were eventually weeded out was that they were actually at first encouraged to speak out, because Mao would have these campaigns where people were encouraged to voice their criticisms because he wanted open discussion. But eventually he couldn't take the criticism and he turned it against them and said, oh, now you're being a reactionary or you're being a rightist. Kind of reminds me of how Trump is doing right now. Anytime the media says anything, he calls them an alarmist, or anytime people who are on his side, if they say, oh, you're an alarmist, right? And then, of course, it's not, you know, hopefully you're not gonna see anyone dead in the United States. It's a little different a situation, but yeah, yeah, you know, in this case, you can see even if Mao was a communist and this whole movement was communist, his tactics, you know, totalitarian regimes, whether they're fascist or communist, they might not look that different in certain cases, right? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's really great that you were particularly interested in that point, Nat. Did you were you particularly interested in those moments in the readings, or in those moments in history? Yeah. Sorry, I'm bad at asking questions, but yeah, thanks for, yeah, did you have anything else, Matt, about?
No, I'm just drawing a blank, sorry.
No, it's okay, me too. Well, it's, okay, so I wanted to actually show you guys another movie. It's not a movie, a video, and it's actually a video essay. So maybe I should explain, and maybe this is a reintroduction to myself. I'm actually when I started out, you know, in undergrad, I actually majored in film studies. So a lot of the sources I still use when I teach Asian American studies or Asian studies do come from media, and so I did want to share with you this this video about that. That's kind of talking about how looking at the films under the communist era might show, you know, give you a lot more insight into how communism worked. Certainly, you can definitely say it's propaganda, right? If a state is producing media that it wants the masses to believe in. But I want to propose something to you. I want to argue that all media is potentially propaganda. It doesn't matter if it's in a communist state or it's in a country like ours that's ostensibly free. Even the advertisements that we watch that are made by corporations could be propaganda. Do you guys agree or disagree? Because I think what I'm trying to get at is that, and your sister says she agrees, is that we should take any kind of media that we watch to be trying to tell us something or trying to make an argument, trying to persuade us. It just, what matters is the what it's trying to tell us, right? And what techniques it's trying to use. And so arguably, what's the difference between propaganda and a PSA, right? A public service announcement. Like, public service announcements are supposed to be for our good and for our help. And if you have a communist regime that's putting out media, it's supposed to be, the communism is an ideology that's about the power of the people. So ideally, you'd like media that would help out the people, right? Yeah, so Shira says, I agree, it may not always be malicious or trying to have a huge effect, but it's there. And Elizabeth says, you can't really avoid bias. So if we can't avoid bias, why don't we lean into it? Why don't we have honest conversations about where we're coming from, right? So I'm gonna show this video to you guys, and hope you guys enjoy it. Hope it's not too academic or esoteric or boring. Yeah, so let me pull that up. And if you guys want to watch it on your own time too, I think I'm not going to show you guys the whole thing. The links are there in the presentation, which I'll put up. So, okay, so. Okay, can you guys see the video?
Yep.
Okay. So this is called Revolution on Screen, and it's by a person who is a film professor or a media professor, and his name is Kevin B. Lee. He's like me, he's a Taiwanese American guy, but I was always interested in his work when I was in college, so I thought I'd show you that. All right.
On October 1st, 1949, the People's Republic of China was founded. The ruling Communist Party, led by Chairman Mao Zedong, set forth on a mission to create a new nation, liberated from Western and Japanese imperialism, as well as ancient feudal culture. The People's Republic would assert China's independence, not just politically and economically, but culturally.
So before I get too deep into the video, I realize I should show you guys these videos, and I don't really give you guys any prompts, but maybe you guys can think a little bit about what is the role of movies in your world. What does it seem like the role of movies are in this time period, in this part of the world? And if maybe you can, if there are any genres that you see, are there any things that like look like movies that we have in America? Are there any similar kinds of stories? Is there a version of a communist action film or a communist romantic comedy, and why or why not? So hopefully those are good guiding questions and thoughts. Okay. So back to the program.
But culturally. The founding of a national cinema, one that was boldly and uniquely Chinese, was critical to this mission. From the beginning, the party leaders understood the power of movies to captivate the masses and sway them to adopt their ambitious social programs. The challenge was to devise a cinema that would convey these messages effectively across the nation. By 1949, only a fraction of Chinese had even seen a movie, as theaters were mostly in the big cities. Cinema had existed in China since the start of the century, especially in the cosmopolitan city of Shanghai. But the new regime rejected almost all pre-existing films as bourgeois. The new cinema of the People's Republic had to be simple in concept and straightforward in execution to appeal to as many people as possible. To develop this new art form for the masses, Mao's cultural architects looked to one of China's most revered artistic traditions, the opera. Chinese opera, with its clear character types, iconic expressions, and overpowering music, provided a blueprint for people's cinema. The camera, like an opera performer, moves through the moment until it freezes in a powerful gesture. Filmmakers also embraced the Soviet model of socialist realist cinema. These films conveyed positive portrayals of the working masses, promoting collectivism and mass mobilization, with less emphasis on the individual, the psychological, and the emotional, traits that were common to Hollywood films that the party considered decadent. Bridge, the first feature film made in the People's Republic, establishes many of these elements. Nearly 10 minutes pass before a single character is addressed by name. Mostly they call each other comrade. It feels like a bold new vision of collectivist cinema, but eventually it settles into a conventional, character-driven narrative about the construction of a strategically vital bridge during the war against the nationalist army. The film introduces character types that would become mainstays of PRC cinema for years to come. On the one hand, there's a smug, westernized bourgeois. Here, he's an engineer who doubts that the bridge can be completed with existing resources. He's matched against a heroic laborer who combines his ground-level expertise and proletarian charisma to rally his comrades to the cause. The ending is a foregone conclusion. The only suspense is in whether the bourgeois engineer joins the struggle. In this case, he is successfully reformed. In subsequent films, his kind usually wasn't so lucky. Bridge is a cornerstone for the filmmaking that prevailed throughout the 50s. Simple, clear exaltations of workers, peasants, and soldiers. But there was also an undercurrent of films influenced by the May 4th movement, a school of leftist critique that predated the revolution. These films were less propagandistic and more focused on burrowing deeply into the social mechanisms of oppression that plagued China for generations. Many of them were adaptations of May 4th literature, and yet they featured some of the strongest cinematic work of that time. New Year's Sacrifice is a story of a widow's exploitation at the hands of a brutal patriarchy, adapted from the work of a famous May 4th writer, Lu Xun. While the source novel uses the nuanced, detached perspective of a bourgeois narrator, the movie achieves a direct, first-person portrayal of underclass suffering. The musical soundtrack reinforces the link to Chinese opera, intensifying dramatic and emotional states. Given that the film is about a woman who has no voice in her own fate, the expressiveness of the music, often used in place of dialogue, is especially heartrending. While the widow is given the standard iconic treatment, she's ultimately a tragic figure, a dramatic break from the communist heroes that dominated the screen. The filmmakers had to add an epilogue to assure audiences that her pre-revolutionary fate would never happen in the present day.
这样的时代终于过去了，终于一去不复返了。
我愿意伺候你一辈子，求您不要把我嫁出去。
Family tells a story of young members of an aristocratic household buckling under the weight of an unyielding patriarch. It evokes a slowly dying way of life, and in doing so, it approaches the devastation of Orson Welles' The Magnificent Ambersons. Its slow, creeping camera work scours its feudal setting, probing the oppressive qualities of Confucian family spaces. Made in an age of collectivist culture, its sensitivity to individual emotional states feels stolen from another world. While these May 4th-inspired films shared the same progressive sentiments, they also bore a dark, anti-establishment streak that made them dangerous to the ruling powers. This Life of Mine tells the story of an honest, humble Beijing policeman whose unwavering trust in the ruling authorities does nothing to stop the oppression of his family.
这40年这改朝换代的，他不管谁来了，我都得欢迎，我都得给他们站岗啊，守夜的。我把这几十年的心血都卖给公家了。 如今我落得他妈家破人亡的，这是他妈胜利了，这叫民主啊，自由啊，廉耻啊！我操他个亲娘祖奶奶！
But a critique of the old regimes could be misconstrued as a critique of the new one. Films like This Life of Mine had to find a balance between carrying the May 4th critical legacy while functioning as simple Maoist propaganda.
可是现在呀，不然了，老百姓要自己当权了，你要给自己站岗了。这些年我干的就是这个。那么，您是新革命党啊？不。
Even Shi Hui, the director and star of This Life of Mine, couldn't manage this balancing act. Just a few years later, Shi was accused of being a bourgeois sentimentalist who valued artists over the masses. Faced with overwhelming criticism, one of the brightest talents of Chinese cinema drowned himself. These outstanding films were the exceptions that proved the rule that in the age of mass culture, artists seeking complexity had to be self-effacing. Any desire for nuance or subtext had to be smuggled into the generic messages imposed by the party. But as Chinese cinema continued to evolve, the template itself would be subject to revision, leading to a blossoming of forms that was as full of splendor as it was short-lived.
Okay, so thanks for watching that. I'm not going to show the next, the second part of it because of time, but I'd love to hear what you guys thought about what you saw. I think it might be the case that some of you might not have seen a Chinese movie or very many Chinese movies yet. So, and certainly if you have, you probably haven't seen this time period of Chinese cinema, because this is when China was kind of isolated from the Western world. They were doing their own thing, being a communist regime. So this is movies that were for the Chinese people and for the Chinese nation. So they're not really, you know, they're not going to be like the kung fu movies that were brought over here by Hong Kong, you know. So any thoughts about what you saw?
Well, the people, the movie industry, I should say, the directors and whatnot, they really do want people to feel a sense of unity. And, you know, again, coming back to communism, damn, I just had it in my head.
Yeah, is the I'm sorry, I was hearing you and then I was reading Yashira's thing, but you yeah, I'm glad that you enjoyed videos like this too. Yeah, sometimes video essays make you feel like you're like really learning because of the music, the choice of the footage and the clips. And I think there's a lot. It's great because they really give you great examples. So it's good. Yeah, it is really interesting to see the film culture of this time. You know, I haven't seen any of the movies, but to hear a little clips about each of them is interesting. It's interesting to see that you know, this first half of this video essay is about movies that took place before the Cultural Revolution, definitely before the Cultural Revolution. So relatively early on in communist Chinese, in communist China, and you see there's a little more freedom, and there's kind of movies that are kind of angry and a little more artistic that probably weren't allowed to be made for the Cultural Revolution. So so if there's any kind of shift in the film culture, it's between before the Cultural Revolution and after the Cultural Revolution. Yeah. I guess another point that I think is interesting is they talk a lot about how to portray the masses and the collective of being a part of something greater than you, which is also kind of anti-individualism and individual rights, which we love so much in the Western world. Did anybody see any discussion of how people could stir a spirit and a feeling about being part of a greater group, being a part of the masses, in either the movies in this clip or in the documentary we saw? Yashir says it was like they want to make realistic movies, but also feel good about the ideal common people, but avoid anything that was personalized, emotional, or specific in complex ways, and removed all forms of individuality. Yeah, it's like there's a lot of times where you didn't have the people's names individually, so you just had people said comrade, and that's true. That's everyone was each other's comrades in this revolution. That was, comrade is like a Russian Soviet term, and then also in the documentary they talked about the statue commemorating the May 4th movement, the student movement, and you saw all these different people, but they're all kind of they're not actual identifiable different individuals in history. They're just they could be any of us. Yeah, definitely. And I guess the video essay talks about how Chinese films were indebted to an earlier cultural tradition, and that was Chinese opera. And in Chinese opera, like a lot of theater arts around the world, you have more simplified types, people that are really, they really stand, like these characters really stand out because they're like cartoons, they're like clowns, right? So in a way you can see that in some of the stories, it's very clear who the villain is and who the good people are in a way. Yeah. Well, so I you know, clearly I like to talk a lot, and I don't. And so I hope this was an interesting class. I think I want yes. And any last thoughts about the People's Republic of China and about film generally, the role of the importance and role of film and media in China at this time? Yeah, Rishira says watching these films made it easier to feel like everyone belonged in their society and everyone was made to fill a role. Yeah, like, yeah, these films were definitely about stirring that dream of you know being feeling happy about your country and your place in it. So thanks so much, Yushira, for your thoughts. I know that these are very broad topics. So yeah, I guess I could ask, is there anything that you've seen in your lifetime that might be similar to anything you saw today? Yeah. For me, it kind of, I mean, it just makes me think of just older times, like the early 20th century. Just the music. It feels, even though it's it's communist China, it still feels very Western influenced because all the music is very orchestral. Even the operas are, using ballet, and so it does feel very European to me, because I think they were just very influenced by that. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. You're sure. You're pointing out how there's definitely nationalism in the U.S. We oftentimes we call it patriotism, and you will see it in the 4th of July, and it's like forced unity and pride, and it's not, and it's a lot of times you hear stories about the origin of the nation, what made this nation great, and how it came together to give us this feeling that it's really one coherent story, when in reality we know history is much more complicated than what a government wants us to think. So you know chances are that the people involved in the founding of the United States probably didn't see what kind of nation we would. Had a little bit of technical error, but okay. Let me just wrap it up today. I wanted to give a little time just to mention that, just to, again, a reminder that I want us to work towards a path of being able to either turn in a paper that's around 800 words, about around 2 pages, double spaced, or a presentation that's 5 minutes about a subject that you would like to know, I'm sorry, a subject you'd like to delve into deeper. So it can be anything that we've talked about in class, any of these topics. If you want it to be about communist China, if you want it to be about the virus response, it could be any of those things. I want to know what you are interested in. I'm pointing at you for the camera, are interested in, related to Chinese culture and heritage. And then next week we're going to be covering chapter 16 and 17. So it's about, it's actually a lot about, so it's about the time that that China kind of opened up economically and reformed, and then about how it kind of rose up in the 90s economically and the 2000s. So it should be pretty interesting. and we'll talk about music. We'll talk about Chinese music for our cultural demo. Does anybody? I'd love to ask you guys, those of you who are here on the class, if you have any thoughts on the final paper or presentation, if you have any topics that you already are thinking of.
For me, I'm doing a kind of cliche thing, talking about Kung Fu, how it's developed in China and how it's made its journey to the West.
Okay.
And how it's impacted like Western movies and whatnot and people's idea of Chinese people, you know?
Nice. Any sources you're looking at?
Well, see, that's the thing, because there's just so many. Right now, I'm just going off of Wikipedia right now, but I'm going to do like proper research.
Yeah.
For like all the different styles and whatnot, because it's just so many different categories.
Yeah, if you don't feel obligated to cover everything, maybe you can pick out, you can zone in by picking out maybe one, like, I don't know if you're thinking of like, you're interested in like learning about like a specific school of Kung Fu, maybe you will just want to pick out one. I think their histories are quite complicated and sometimes made up and imagined, but maybe you can also even identify just 1 week where you would like to concentrate on, like one of the times in history, Chinese history, that you'd like to concentrate on, like when there was a lot of immigration to the U.S. So yeah, we talked. I covered what I covered about Kung Fu on week 9, and so you might find the presentations in week 9 helpful. Yeah. Any questions you have for me?
Well, I did earlier, but I kind of answered in my own way. So, yeah.
Yeah. The guidelines I have on the assignments folder, I would like you guys to look at them and follow them. So it says that you need to have quotes, you need to have supporting arguments, you need to summarize your sources and share your own opinion if you agree or disagree. Yeah. Okay. Well, can I ask anyone else have any questions or possible topics that they're going to cover?
I actually have just a quick question about the quiz. We were just supposed to email it to you, right? We didn't need to upload it to Blackboard.
Yes, I would like you to email it to me.
Okay.
Yes. I still don't really know how to do that on Blackboard, so please email it to me.
Okay.
Yeah. And I'm not really doing the late penalty thing. So just turn it into me when you can. Yeah. And any questions about the quiz? Other questions about it?
Actually, not about the quiz, but if I have because I feel like I'm having just trouble like picking a topic. Well, can I email you and ask you?
Sure. Yeah. You definitely. Yes, you can definitely email me. I remember that you had mentioned that internet culture was of interest to you.
Yeah.
And I know that, like, I think I had a link of like Hassan Minaj's program that had an episode about both the Me Too movement and about kind of the suppression and censorship of things related to Uyghurs in Western China. So that might be of interest to you. Yeah. I think censorship in general is an interesting topic. I think everyone, knows of China as being this place with crazy censorship, and in a way it's true. But I think I'm interested in kind of in kind of analyzing how that happens, because a lot of it happens through social media, which is kind of self-reporting. Are we kind of also in a system of surveillance and censorship when we're on Facebook? Like, if I post something that my friends don't agree with, are they going to report me? I don't know. So yeah. Lilo, Do you have any topics that you are thinking about? Or Yashira as well? Okay, well, you can definitely email me anytime. Oh, I see your chat. Not too sure yet. Okay, well, look, it's gonna be. I just really want it to be chill. You don't even have to work on it until like the week before, because clearly I'm also being chill about it. So, and we still have a little over a month of things. So yeah, and I'm really excited for you guys to share with me. So I'm just excited. So feel free to ask me any questions or yeah, if you have an idea for a topic, please let me know. There's suggested articles in the Blackboard, and they are kind of long and kind of like tough to read, some of them, but if you really want to challenge yourself, you can do that too. Great. Well, at that note, I will bid you guys farewell till next Friday when we talk about the reform era of China. And yeah, feel free to reach me by email for anything. Yeah. All right. Have a good day, guys. See you guys later.
Good day, Professor.